I'll never forget waking up on September 11th, 2001, and looking out the window of my office, which was very close to the World Trade Center, and seeing both towers on fire. It was really kind of a life-changing event because the World Trade Center was literally in my neighborhood, something I saw every day, and to see them on fire and to eventually go up on the roof and photograph them, and then to all of our horror to see them collapse was something which I had never experienced in my life. Um, it changed the landscape of New York. It changed the landscape of my neighborhood. It was something which, having photographed civil wars and areas of conflict for 25 years, to suddenly to have the story, the situation, literally in my backyard, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. So, and it took probably a couple years to actually come to terms with that horrific day, because for, I would say, months after 9/11, we could smell and see the smoldering ashes of what had happened on that day. So it was really something that stayed with myself and New Yorkers for years after that. I immediately grabbed my camera bag and ran up on the roof of my building and started photographing, because this is what I basically do. I'm a documentary photographer, and the way I respond to these things is by, photographing. And I just thought that this needs to be documented. Somebody needs to photograph this so we have some memory. Um, and as I was on the roof of my building photographing, to our horror, the towers collapsed. And I just, once the smoke cleared and they were no longer there, I just was in kind of a state of disbelief. Couldn't believe that they were no longer there. This was an impossibility. So right then I knew I had to go down and go right down to ground zero and spend my time photographing this. When you're confronted with this overwhelming kind of horror and grief and emotion, as a photographer, as a person who's recording this for television or radio or newspaper, you have to just, in some ways, put your emotions aside, or try to some extent, so that you can function and do your work without being completely debilitated and just to collapse in an emotional kind of wreck. So I think that you have to almost go on a kind of automatic pilot and let your kind of professionalism or your experience take over, and just kind of ride on that, as opposed to, and not try and overthink the situation, but just do your work. And because it's so important to have a memory, to have some record of these kind of situations, so that hopefully we can learn from it and never have it happen again. The amazing thing, which I'll never forget, was that all the fine dust and paper, there was tons of paper floating around the air. And I was really amazed that there was nothing that resembled what had been an office building. There was no computers or phones or filing cabinets. There was nothing that was recognizable as something that had been in an office building. There were a lot of medical teams that were rushed down from hospitals all over the city. They set up these first aid stations, waiting for survivors to come, which they never came. No, there were no survivors. There was one or two out of the thousands of people that had been in that building. So it was very disturbing and kind of very unsettling, the fact that that this was it looked as though all of Lower Manhattan had been obliterated. There was all this smoke and fire everywhere, and you really couldn't see where it ended. It looked as though the whole southern tip of Manhattan had been just devastated. And the other thing which was, I'll never forget, was the effort to look for survivors seemed so kind of futile. There are these little human figures in this vast field of devastation trying to pick through the rubble, and how impossible a task it was. There were hundreds of people that descended, these first responders, firemen, policemen who came to try and find survivors, and it just seemed like a complete impossibility with all the fire raging everywhere and all this twisted wreckage, and just thinking this was like the worst day of our lives. Photographing on September 11th and the next day was very difficult because the emotions were running so high among the firemen and the policemen. They wanted everybody out of the area, and they weren't interested in photographers or film crews or television crews or anything. They wanted everybody out. But I had to stay. I had to photograph because I knew we needed some record of what had happened. But I was constantly being asked to leave, and I just, against the, all sorts of pressure, I decided to stay and photograph the relief effort. There was fire trucks there trying to put out the fire. There were dogs looking for survivors. There was all sorts of activity going on, but I wasn't welcome, and the press wasn't really welcome. So it became very difficult to tell that story in pictures. But I tried as best I could to get an overview. I think for me the most dramatic view of the situation was getting these pictures of this incredible vast area of devastation, and the surrounding buildings which were on fire, and the shards of this building which were just stuck in the ground, and a testament to this incredible, almost like tombstones of this terrible event. For years after 9/11, I couldn't bear to look at my pictures. They literally were left in the filing cabinet unedited for several years. Looking at them now, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. It's hard to really believe that happened, or that I made those pictures, or that I was there. It's so horrific and so unimaginable to murder 3,000 plus innocent people from all walks of life, and there were Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Jews, and everybody was there from all different nationalities, and they were all killed on that morning.